Hello, dear students. Welcome to this revision class on the paper Reading Poetry. Poems use language in a very condensed form. Poems can tell a story, can describe something, talk about a particular concept. Most poems make you think about some aspect of life, something that the poet saw, sparked a thought, and that is developed into a poem. And by making a close textual analysis of the poem, by resorting to a close reading of the poem, you are supposed to discern those ideas which the poet is trying to express. You need to analyze the technique used. You need to find the theme, the recurring motives, the simples. By this textual analysis or by close reading of a given poem, you need to find out or you need to show how in the lines the poet conveys his attitude. Sometimes the question tells you the attitude. You need to show how in lines the poet conveys his disapproval of something, his admiration for something. What you are supposed to do is you need to read the poem once or twice or thrice, understand the main idea, the attitude of the poet. You need to identify the genre, what kind of poem is that. You need to find that. If it is a sonnet, you need to understand that. Is it an ode? Is it a lyric? Is it an elegy? You need to find that. So you need to find out what the poet is trying to show through his lines. If the question does not tell you the attitude, most of the questions, the poems that you are asked to give a critical appreciation on for your exam, they won't give you the title, they won't tell you what the poem is about, just a poem. Just those lines will be there, and you are supposed to make an analysis of the poem. You need to show how or by what means, you need to analyze the techniques that the writer employed, the word choice, the imagery used, the structure of the lines, the stanza form, the rhythms used, by resorting to a close analysis of the poem. You need to find out the imagery, you need to find out the metaphors, similes, what are the things, the prosodic features in the poem. Like, you need to make clear the attitude of the poet. You need to find out what kind of poem is it, what kind of poem is it. Like, if it is an objective poem, you need to say that. If it is a subjective poem, mention that in your essay. You need to refer to these features: personification, symbolism, word choice. I hope you are all thorough with these different poetic devices employed by poets: imagery, personification, symbolism, synecdoche, metonymy. So find out, make a very close analysis, line by line, word by word. Find out each of these features present in the poem. Make note of it. And for example, if you have found out that there is a metaphor in a particular line, you need to say that the poet very beautifully uses this metaphor to convey this idea, and you need to quote that line as well. And don't stop by quoting that line, but quote that line and say that, this helps to convey the idea, or how this idea is conveyed with the help of that metaphor. You need to mention that also. So what are the things that you need to write in your answer? You need to write, if it is a metaphor, you need to write that there is this metaphor in this line. In that, you need to line in the second stanza, in the first line of the second stanza, there is this metaphor used, and you need to quote that line. And don't stop there. Say that, how this metaphor helps to bring out the idea of the poem, or how it supports, or how it shows the attitude of the poet. You need to say that also. Make a comment on that. You need to make your own comment on each and everything in the poem. You need to make a comment on the theme, on the imagery used, on the form of the poem. You need to tone of the poem. So the poet, if uses this particular word very effectively, or the repetition of this particular sound, and give a quotation and say that this word and this is suggestive of something else, so make a comment as well. You say the thing and make a comment as well. Then if you find an alliteration or consonants in a particular line, say that the poet uses alliteration, and give the line and say why that alliteration, or how that alliteration helps in the movement or tempo, how it affects the tempo of the poem, and so on. Then you need to also find out how the idea is developed. Show how the writer develops or continues the idea that he is trying to say. Look for words and lines from the poem, substantiate your argument. Then you need to talk about the recurring themes, motives. What is the main idea that the poet is trying to express. Then another key feature that you need to note is the tone of the poem. Tone is about the feelings, mood, and atmosphere which the poem creates and evokes in the minds of the reader. Tone can be related to the poet's or the speaker's attitude or feelings towards a particular subject, or a concept, or an abstract quality or so. It can change within the poem. It can start with the poem can start in a happy tone and end in a melancholic tone. Different lines or verses may have different tone, so you need to identify the tone of the poem. It can be optimistic, it can be cheerful, enthusiastic. These are a few words that you can use to explain the tone of the poem. It can be nostalgic, it can be pessimistic, it can be sarcastic, ironic, it can be humorous, reverent, it can be a light-hearted poem. So try to identify the tone of the poem and give an example, substantiate with your poem with the lines from the poem, and make a comment also why that tone is used, why the poet uses a particular tone in the poem. You can say that this tone is established or created or maintained with the help of these images, or with the help of these prosodic devices, and so on. And if the tone changes, try to say why the tone changes or why it is altered. The how part is often the how part is often done best by exploring other aspects of language, such as the sentence structure, imagery, word choice. Since these are often used to convey the tone. Also, features such as sound, exaggeration, and anticlimax are often used to establish the tone of the poem. You may use any of the features you discussed in previous questions, like metaphor, imagery, to describe the tone of the poem. And the last question that you need to analyze, this is the gist of your critical appreciation. It may ask you to refer to the poem as a whole. You need to refer to the poem as a whole. Read the poem once or twice. Keep in mind the purpose of the poem and its theme. So maybe in the second reading you will understand the poem, you will get the theme. So keeping that in mind, again read the poem. What did the poet want you to consider? What new insights have you been given? And refer to the key ideas in the poem, and then closely analyze the techniques used by the poet. For example, the sound qualities like onomatopoeia, alliteration, assonance, the tone, different tones used, then the structural features such as length of the lines, the the stanza form, if there is a repetition involved, try to find that. Then imagery, metaphor, simile, personification, symbols used. So make a very close analysis of all these and write a very beautiful essay. Start by saying, by referring to the poem. Tell that if it is a descriptive one, mention that. If it is a narrative poem, mention that. If it's an objective, say that. And write the main theme. Then try to make a comment on the theme. Then maybe in the second stanza, on the second paragraph onwards, you can make a close analysis of the poem, maybe line by line analysis of the poem. And along with those, along with the analysis, you can write the metaphors. You can find the metaphors and imagery and others prosodic devices used, and mention that, quote lines from the poem, and make a comment also, how those features affect the poem, and how it helps to convey the main idea of the poem. So these are the things that you need to keep in mind while writing a critical appreciation. So I'll give you an example as well. Then you can conclude the poem, your appreciation, by quoting maybe the last lines, and say that how the poem concludes, or how those lines helps to conclude the idea, or how successfully has the poet conveyed his message in his poem, or how effective has the poet been in conveying his feelings about the thing mentioned in the poem. Make a general comment on the poem, your own comments. So that is how you end the poem. After making a thorough analysis, end the poem with your own general comment on the poem. Is it clear? We'll see one example.